It is Monday, May 4th, and it is time for the Bad Dog Book Club. I'm your otter editor, Skip Ruddertail, and with me, as always, is...
the driving cat, Toonses. Although I was the passenger on the way here.
Yes, he doesn't own a car, so...
I'm not insured to drive Skip's car, so I can't wreck it over a cliff.
And this is episode 5B, the Bad Dog Book Club, and
Yes.
We're going to be discussing Kandrel's On the Bright Beach this week.
Which I hope you heard read by the wonderful Alex Vance in his beautiful, sultry voice.
And
that he
man,
cannot hear enough compliments
he gave this one a seriously good reading. If you haven't checked it out, I definitely encourage you to do so. It was pretty intense, so props to you, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
So
you can put that on your earbuds on the subway. No one will ever know.
So I picked this week's story, so maybe I'll just start us off by saying a little bit of why I picked this story.
Mm-hmm. Because it's a little bit different from the direction we'd gone in before, where we didn't want to get people to get the impression we were only looking for published works or works from already very well-known, respected authors. We want to be displaying the works of people who are trying to get their name known within the community as well. Just want to get a soapbox for themselves to stand up on. Mm-hmm. We're trying to be very open-minded here. We just want to see what we've got, basically, as a community. Mm-hmm. So, hey, just a little bit of bravery, a little bit of courage, and
So,
we'd love to have
has
your
been
productions.
published, but this story has not. So, yeah, it's except on Sofri, and you may have seen it there. But it's one I wanted, we've had a couple kind of serious stories the last couple weeks, a couple, heavy, maybe even downers. Mm-hmm. So I wanted, to do something, and as you would say, a little more pulpy.
Yes.
And, a little more light, and with kind of a happier ending, but, still a, good story, and had a lot of things for us to think about and talk about. And I think this one, fit the bill pretty well. Is there somewhere you wanted to start a discussion with, Toonses, or?
What I liked about the Bright Beach, if you want to think of that as like the link you click to get to this room and some kind of weird dreamscape future thing. Yeah. I'm trying to. By the way, what kind of like actual physical device did you put this in? I imagine it's some kind of like dreamscape you went into at night when you went to bed or something like that.
See, that was something I was wondering about, because there was that one comment that they'd been there all night because it was time for them to go to work in the morning. And so
alarms were ringing and things like that?
Yeah. And so at first I was like, okay, it's just like, playing World of Warcraft or Second Life, which is an association we both made. Yeah, but at the same time, either they are staying up 24 hours a day, or this is some kind of thing that you can do while you're asleep. Mm-hmm. Maybe this will, count for getting your REM sleep or whatever, and so you can still do this and be rested. It's which is kind of an interesting idea, and I don't know.
Got the impression of it being kind of a controlled lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
And that's great because it puts it perfectly within the realm of fantasy, which is what dreams are.
Yes.
Now, most people we can't really control our dreams now, but that's why this is such an interesting construct to use, is because it gives a certain control and thus a certain responsibility over the fantasies that are completely immaterial.
Right. And this is, furries in a sci-fi setting, and kind of in a hard sci-fi setting, in that, there isn't, magic or fantastic element here. All this stuff is that, is stuff that could plausibly be done, I think, technologically at some point. And we do have hints that our main characters are humans, because so much is made of Mephalah's, suit, as it were, or, avatar that he's wearing.
Yes.
So, this is kind of a plausible hard sci-fi furry story, which I always like to see.
And it's interesting when a sci-fi story is one that is exceptionally realistic and self-aware, which is a kind of weird difference in tone from what you would get usually, because we're actually looking at something that is almost like an exceptionally literal contemporary story, but is being read in a science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, that's the
terms.
thing. This could be very near future, I feel like, in a lot of ways. So that the space, computing and simulation technology is going that, I mean, this could be a decade or two away.
Yeah. Aren't you excited, everybody?
Yeah.
I can't wait for hyper-real Second Life so I can get bored with that in 2 weeks, too.
And Toonses will be like the old fur, sitting there going, they keep getting younger.
No.
Like, I remember back in my day, I had to lure at real people. They didn't know I was 60 and 400 pounds in real life. Anyway.
No, that's the thing is you in real life, when you want to live out your fantasies, you don't really have the option because sometimes you aren't your fantasies. You're kind of stuck to this real physical body.
Well, there is that
big problem,
joke that we often talk about in World of Warcraft, which is on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Kind of implying that, nobody knows what you look like on the other end or sound like. And there definitely is that here, in that, there's a very strict separation, which is something I kind of want to come back to, and kind of what this, separation has in terms of Foxy and Chris's relationship. But the Second Life and this kind of simulated world. So they are simulated furs, but they're real people.
Yes.
So I don't think it counts for a little motif of created furs.
No,
I think we're
safe.
I think we're safe. On that one.
These people are unfortunately real, I think, because this it almost sounds like a dire entry in the sense that it could come from a real person's life. I could see this happening, and not just like to common people every day, not even just in some spectacular sense, like some mystical thing happens.
And I think that's a compliment to the story, is that it's the very
precisely
real
it strikes at a common nerve
slice of life of somebody's day. I know one of the things that you want to talk about this created space, and I'm going to use space in an anthropological sense here, meaning that there's this whole big thing in cultural anthropology. You're getting that look, the kind of glazed over look. No, he's getting a glazed over look here, but there's a thing in anthropology between place and space. So, a gay bar, for instance, can become a space. It transforms from a place which is public and, in a sense, vulnerable and open to anybody. And a space is something that is you feel ownership over and control over and belongs to your community in a way.
And this is an important thing.
It still can be vulnerable from things like the state or outsiders, but you have this sense of ownership and it's yours, and it becomes a space.
This is an important thing that I bring up whenever people often criticize things like pride parades, and they deem them as like being unnecessary or superfluous or even damaging to the cause. And I always argue that part of having a space to live your life in is necessarily territorializing it and saying this is where we do our things, and part of that is marching a bunch of big ass flamboyant floats down the main streets. It's a message.
Claiming a space says I have a right to exist.
Yeah, it says this is where our storefronts are. This is where we're buying our books. This is where we're drinking our coffee. This is where we're meeting our lovers. This is where we're sharing our ideas, and you're not going to stop us from doing it. And I think that's important just to be able to understand in the sociological perspective, like you say, and just see it kind of played out in the story, in the construction of this holy ethereal realm within this dreamlike state wherein there's no judgment of these fantasies that people have.
Well, I think that there are kind of two ways that we really see it brought to the forefront. And one is kind of this idea of private and public.
Yeah.
Which, why don't I let you say something about that?
Oh, well, there's one of the big kinks that I think is explored in this story is exhibitionism. So it's a public beach, as is explained very early in the story. It's like 18 plus, nude, public, whatever. And they say very early on that we don't really do private here, things like that. And there's a lot of focus on, especially in the relationship between Chris and the main Foxy character.
Yes.
That Chris is not
who, as
going
far
along
as
with
we
this.
can tell,
he's much more
doesn't
private.
Yeah,
he's much more private. And so there's this conflict here specifically between this exhibitionist desire and this inability to act on it with Chris.
Yeah. And Chris says actually that's why he's there, is because he likes seeing everyone so free and uninhibited. And that's why he comes to the beach. And I think there is this kind of that is a hallmark of a space, is people being able to be themselves.
Yeah.
And Chris probably feels like, for whatever reason, and it's never really explained fully, but that he can't be that uninhibited normally.
Yes, I mean he can't act on his impulses or his desires until he's been extremely
vicarious.
Stressed.
Yeah.
It's when he's been extremely stressed with these past issues he's been dealing with a few days that it has to actually act on his desires.
Yes.
And that's part of what he's talking about, is it's just a split space where people are supposed to be carefree.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think, where we see kind of this idea of space brought up is when Mephala first shows up. Because as you said, this is it's a public beach in a way, and and technically that anybody could come in. But yet at the same time, it's a space and that they have laid claim to, this group of people. And Mephala is, until he's kind of vindicated or proven, he's trespassing in a sense.
Yeah.
And we see this kind of rejection of him for not obeying the rules of the community. Or maybe being too forward in some ways when he first shows up.
Which is a natural impulse you actually see in the chat rooms, by the way. It's not some whole cloth construction. It's something you actually see within these communities when you go online and chat with the furries.
Yeah. And, I mean, my take on that is like, boy, Foxy is being, kind of a dick or kind of overreacting here. Yeah.
Because I'm from I always feel like the outsider on this. Because the moment I step into these rooms, I never stay long. I didn't stay on Second Life for more than about 2 weeks. Because any time I go into a room, I'd feel like, okay, everybody here already knows them. How do I talk to anybody? This is kind of boring. My graphics are terrible.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go chat on AIM. Let's play some Team Fortress 2.
Yeah,
and that's how my Second Life experience ended.
Foxy wasn't really very welcoming of this new person, wasn't. And who in a lot of ways, and Chris even says to him several times, look, he's new, he doesn't know. He's just starting out, like, give the guy a break. He just got here,
and it's one of the big
I think Chris's reaction is much better, but I understand, because Foxy is protecting his space. He has a thing going. It's important to him. He doesn't want it to change.
But the thing for Foxy is he doesn't want to see the walls.
Yeah.
That's his problem, is he doesn't want to recognize the boundaries out there, and part of seeing the walls would be, forgiving the Lion for being a little bit brash and forward and not being quite so protective of this, section of his life. Do you think that might be a flaw in the character, that it's a certain reluctance, don't you think? Don't you have to think, at one point you have to be able to give that up, to give up that fantasy, and to let it be not real? Just in essence of just for getting along with others. One of the lines I liked early on was, we all made little sacrifices to be social and understood. I mean, nobody wants to be an outcast, and that's one of the main problems characters seem to be dealing with in this story, and why they escape to this space. But Foxy is certainly not giving up that much. He's being a little bit selfish, don't you think? Or am I not being very forgiving of the character?
No, I think you're probably right. I don't know if he is... At least consciously, let me phrase it this way, at least consciously, I don't think he's giving up very much. I think part of what the story's about, though, is this kind of realization that he obviously has these feelings for Chris, which he isn't fully aware of. And he thinks there is this, kind of very perfect environment, where they could just lie on the beach every night and have sex with everybody. And it's fantastic, but at the same time, Chris can go away for a week, and it just destroys him. It leaves him a nervous wreck, and I think that's kind of one of the things he's giving up being here, that he isn't aware of. And I don't think he is even aware of by the end, but it's like, because this is how they socialize, he doesn't, you get the feeling he doesn't know where Chris lives, or anything like that. They've never met.
Rather helpless once
in real life.
Disappeared.
Yeah, and there's nothing he can do about it because he doesn't know the stuff about Chris,
and there
Chris
are
doesn't
people
know
I think
this
in our
stuff
lives
about him.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
If they just one day were no longer responding to messages, I mean, what would you have to do? Like start researching?
Yeah.
It
But
gives you a very helpless
the relationship has developed to such an extent, that it's I think it's gotten to the point where it's probably not good for him to be in this state with Chris, where they know so little.
And do you think he recognizes that at the end?
Intimate relationship. I'm not sure if they do. I'm not sure. I hope so. I hope so.
It seems to me like they seem to be content with going with the relationship as it had been before.
See, I don't know. I think something's changing, but I mean, obviously, what they did was something different. The fact that they actually had sex and that Chris let his guard down to that degree, I suppose.
Yes.
For them to actually have sex, and part of what he said is because he was exhausted. But maybe that's the start of something for him, and maybe that's a breakthrough for him and them. But I think both of them are kind of gonna. Why they're there may have changed. And it may have gone from something that is literally like a spring break, like an extended spring break, like a no strings attached. Here we go, and we have people that are friends, but there's no kind of real world expectation or consequences.
Yes. And
by Chris disappearing, we had consequences in his life, and that he wasn't happy there, and he was always looking around. And so I think that's probably a fundamental change in the equation. And hopefully they can work that out.
I'd hope so.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Chris is an otter, so of course he's gonna, use all his ottery wiles and come up with something
crazy
brilliant.
Social animals. They're basically like big playful dogs.
Yes.
But otters are like crazy blowing up, popular now. What's with that? Like, otters and huskies.
Well, fantastic. Otters are great. What's not to like about otters?
I just want to know, just what specifically makes the stalk rise? Like, do we start seeing more news stories about like otters at zoos and people are just interested in otters? I just want to know what machinations cause.
See,
this.
I think maybe it has to do if there's a bunch, if you get somebody that has a neat character who's a species and maybe they get a lot of art done or something, and somebody else is like, oh wow, they look great. Maybe I'll be a husky too or something.
Yeah. It just needs to be fashionable.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we need a raccoon-assance because I want to make raccoons fashionable again. I want to start this.
Raccoons are like otters. They're always in fashion.
No, we need more power. Okay. Look, you don't stop to hit the top. That's how it works.
What would you do with your power?
I don't know, but we would definitely make the masks
You'd take it over to a pond and wash it gently before you ate it. That's what you do with your power.
Yeah, but why can't we? People like that though.
That's true. It is adorable. It is adorable.
I mean, we go on a picnic, the food's going to be clean, so we'll wash it first.
There you go.
That's romantic,
right? I know one of the things that you said struck you was a little bit about the names, and you said you were telling me before sometimes it was a little hard to keep track of names, or there was an odd combination of names.
Because it's the naming standards need to be based on internet naming standards. Like, so some people use their real names; they want to be referred to as like
Chris.
Thing. Yeah.
Or a name that sounds real.
And Foxy, do you think Foxy is the username, or is that just how it's described?
Yeah.
I think Foxy.
And we don't know. I think I'm guessing he probably goes by Foxy, at least in this room, but it could just be Chris's nickname for him. And that's the only, other people talk to him, but it's like, oh, hey, object. Yeah. And let's get to that in a second. That's probably a good segue.
And compared to that, you have, Ma'afala. And things like that, which that made me think Chris Muafatu Ma'afala, the former running back of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had that long-ass name on the back of the jersey. That's the first image that struck into my head. And so, no, I'm not going to remember Ma'afala, really, I'm not, because now I'm just thinking of football and, guys with big hair running for 3 yards. See, it's just, but I think what I liked about, but I wanted to clarify that I liked that. Yeah, tight ends and wide receivers. But what I like about that is that it reinforces the sense of anonymity that you would find on the internet. Because, I mean, the name doesn't stick in your head. And in a more classic sense, you might read about a bar where as soon as you're gone, the faces have kind of rubbed from your memory. And in this sense, like once the characters are off screen, you have like a vague sense of having lost their identities or the sense of their personalities to a degree where there's this blurring of who is and who is not seeing you. Kind of plays on the exhibitionist kick I was talking about earlier. Yeah. So that's what I liked about the way the names were structured. And it also helps because it actually kind of blunts the significance of some of the more minor characters so that the two main characters, Chris and Foxy, are immediately identified by two concrete terms that you stick in your head pretty directly, and Ma, Fala, and whatever
that's true.
They just kind of sink into the back of your head. Yeah. It's kind of like a really clever, like from a writing perspective, it's a really clever kind of sorting mechanism to kind of force the reader into the direction you want to. Always look for little tricks like this when you're reading stories, because you can kind of adopt and or plagiarize them for yourself later on. As they always say, like the greatest artists plagiarize. It's true.
Well, let's talk about the sex here too, because this is, I think, pretty much without a doubt the most porn-filled or pulp-filled, if you're tuned to the story, that we've featured.
I prefer smutty. That's the term.
Smutty,
yes, because it's blunt.
Smutty, yes. This is a intense, sexually explicit story, and I think the most explicit story we've featured so far by far. So let us know what you thought of that. Toon says earlier you were saying, if you're listening to Alex read the story, nobody will know what you're listening to. I beg to differ. If you're on the train listening to the story, I think you would have had to been, casually rearranging your pants periodically, so people might have guessed,
Just, wear a long jacket.
Yes. Like, it's 80 degrees out. What are you doing?
Hey, winter is holding on. Get all that smut, that public smut in while you can.
Exactly. So yeah, what did you think about that? Was that? I thought it was pretty good.
It was.
You're a pulp writer. What did you think? And you write a lot of smut. What did you think of the smut here?
Well, one of the things that the character talks about often and strives to be is diplomatic. And I kind of feel like that's a good way to be in any regards. I want to be diplomatic myself. So there's this certain self-embedded, self-apologetic tone to the story that accompanies this narrative of this fantasy that kind of recognizes in itself that it's that there's a reason why it's fantasy, if that makes sense.
Well, one of the things that actually Kandrel said to me when he submitted this story, or when we talked about using it, I said, well, just so you know, it's zoo, it's bestiality. And I said, really? Because I'd read it, and that wasn't my take at all. And he said, well, he said, some people think it is.
Well, the main argument against it not being zoo is that it's essentially about two human people controlling these artificial avatars.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a weak argument, though, or kind of too thin a standard, if that makes sense. Because all the images are about,
But
zoo.
It depends on where you start. Like, if you're saying bestiality, if you start with the physical appearance, if that's your criteria, so if they're on four legs, it's bestiality, which I think would be, or if they're zoomorphic, let's say this way, because he's mostly a fox, or they use the term feral, I guess, in the story. If that's your starting point, then I guess this is bestiality. If your starting point instead is there are sentient,
and so therefore it's not,
and
but that's using more of a moral standard, I think.
I think so. Well, yeah, I'm a moral guy. If your starting point is sentient, and that they can. They have the capacity to decide and express their desires verbally and sophisticatedly, and they're just as smart as you are, and in this case they are. I don't think this is bestiality at all, because there's not an imbalance here. It's not a human and an animal. or a talking animal and a non-talking animal. It's two talking. They're people.
It's described in the story that everybody is there because they have an itch to scratch. It's kind of described. I said it's kind of self-apologetic because it portrays itself in these kind of self-effacing tones. It's discussed in the story actually, literally whether or not it would count as bestiality, and the conclusion they seem to come to is that it's better not to think of it, which just goes in line with the whole don't see the walls theme. But they're not going to discuss it in the story, but we're going to discuss it here. And I think that you would have to qualify as that kind of story because that's where all the images are. That's what the fantasy eventually boils down to. Even if the frame is that there are these two people controlling these characters, which is a nice frame. It puts it in a very realistic contemporary sense. I wouldn't sacrifice the frame, and I wouldn't want to disqualify the story either. But they say in the story. What Foxy likes to do is be diplomatic, and I'm trying to be diplomatic from the other end, from somebody who wouldn't necessarily like a bestiality story for the purposes somebody else might like it, but as a text and being able just to read it and understand it and just appreciate it in the same way that you might appreciate Help, I'm a Woman, even though big surprise, I'm not actually a fundamentalist Baptist who wants to subjugate women to the kitchen. Just to understand it as a text.
I guess, yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I guess, for me looking at it as I suppose I'm approaching it partially from a morality standpoint, because of the warning that he gave, and why, and so people reading it, like if they're opposed
nobody makes
to
you read it. Nobody makes you read it.
That's nobody exactly makes you read it. But why are people opposed to bestiality? And is it? In my case, it's not the shape of the people involved. It's the only one of them's a person.
Yeah, exactly.
But
it's kind of like missing the forest for the tree.
If they're both persons,
yes.
And I'm using persons plural there. If they're both persons,
yes.
Then I think it's okay. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's okay bestiality then. I don't see it as bestiality personally.
The essential difference between fantasy and reality, though. I mean, fantasy is specifically constructed. I mean, that's what all these weird little images we create, like all these furry characters we make, it's an abstraction process to make it, digestible, essentially. Yeah. And that's what makes it fantasy and not reality. And I
think part of it depends on how it's handled too, and this is something that I'm sure we'll touch on in future stories. When you get to some of these kind of hot button issues, and a good example is probably writing a story that involves a protagonist who's maybe 14 years old, and there are ways that you can write this porn story that is, we've been 14 years old and maybe we did sexual things and
you're part on one level personal process though.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can make. I'm not sure, especially when you are dealing with fictional stuff, and this is where I'll maybe disagree with say policies on FA. If you're dealing with drawings of animal people or stories about animal people. Nobody's being hurt, nobody's being exploited here.
Let me talk about this from a reader's perspective, and why oftentimes I buy these arguments of why these things are not essentially immoral, but the position I always find myself defending that I think is often misunderstood is not wanting to sometimes read it. Yeah. And I found oftentimes I oftentimes like venturing out. You go beyond your boundaries. Yep. To just in terms of understanding these texts, but I always use the standard of what if I were to come across this in an actual novel. I was reading this great book by Haruki Murakami, I believe it was called, Kafka on the Shore. Wonderful book about this kid that ran away from home. It was had all these sci-fi mystical themes to it, and then in the context of the story, there was this pornographic scene in which the kid actually sleeps with his mother. Oh, and then early in the story, actually fools around with a girl he met at a bus stop. And it's like, this is an actual novel. It was on the New York Times bestseller. what was I supposed to do? Like, skip it? And I always like, when there are these subjects that you're squeamish about, something like bestiality, such as, you got to figure out, like, when are you going to test your boundaries? So that
that's why, and so I think we're in agreement, though. I'm saying, there shouldn't be, at least in this case, where you're not exploiting somebody. These aren't pictures of real people, say. Where you're not exploiting somebody. I don't think you should set these hard and fast rules, because I think, they can get you to, right,
you can't just reject a text.
Right.
You can't just say that I don't like this text on its grounds. I can't just let it exist. It was written, it exists. You can't, and if you can either ignore it or you can try to understand it.
Yeah.
The understanding process, I think, is one a lot of people misunderstand and undervalue.
Yeah.
And if you just think of these things just as purely in an information gathering perspective, and purely in the interest of wanting to comprehend the world around you, it seems to me ignorant to want to suppress or avoid certain material that you don't want to deal with. But there's a fine line to be drawn between not wanting to have to address it because it's a particularly difficult subject for you, because it's on a personal level, a subject that you just aren't comfortable with, or a subject that you think ought to be smitten particularly from polite conversation.
Right.
I like this because this is when you get the kind of political aspects within the public-private dichotomy that's preserved within the pulp center of the story itself. When they're talking about the exhibitionist fantasies, which are the ones that I kind of identified more myself, because I'm a very private person. And so the concept of being absent from the fact that it's fake, if I were on a public beach where, it's kind of more like a bathhouse atmosphere, really.
Yeah.
I would be nervous.
Yeah.
I'd be incredibly nervous. Yeah. And so, personally, that's what I was drawing from this story was...
it's kind of an insight into, right, this is, I could do this, what would I, and you start thinking about what would I be doing in this situation, or who would I be in this setting.
And it's a conflict between what you keep private and what you make public.
And my moment like that in this story for me was, in part thinking about how Foxy is handled, because he is more or less fox-sized, at least, or that's the impression we get here. That it playing on some of this kind of domination submission thing is, there are a couple of points where he's basically picked up and used as a sex toy. Yeah. Which kind of blew me away. I mean,
it's the ultimate kind of form of objectification.
Exactly, and very and being a toppy guy, it was kind of interesting to put myself in that space. Where
being able to have this sentient thing that you can just kind of use like a fleshlight.
Put myself in Foxy's space, I guess, and to imagine myself being just picked up and used as a sex toy or whatever. So that was interesting to me to kind of think about, because it is so objectifying, and that everybody can just kind of literally manhandle him around. And I think it's I see why he likes that, I guess. I see why he finds that it's liberating in a way.
It's a powerlessness
for him.
thing.
Yeah. But it's
which isn't of itself what makes the subject so taboo. It's the powerlessness aspect. That's what makes
why people
the fantasy so playful.
That's why a lot of powerful people are subs in the bedroom, because it's an escape from having to be in power and having to make decisions and all, and he can just go to and be Foxy.
So it's kind of a fantasy that doesn't even in and of itself deny kind of the moral arguments against it. Maybe even sort of takes its energy from that kind of outcast nature of it in some cases.
Well, and it says, I think, because it is such a I think it, his behavior in this place, him being this shape, him, being able to be handled like that and liking this, does talk about how free he feels in this place and why he's so protective of it when Mephala shows up. Because this is obviously, it's risky for him as well, as free as he is, to be here and doing this. So, I think we're all about done for the day. Is there anything that we've forgotten?
No, I wanted to tell everybody about the Kyle Gold reading in New York.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Blue Stockings.
Go ahead.
Well, first I wanted to talk about the Diva Cups.
Okay.
So these crazy things. Well, you know what? I'm not going to tell about them. Just Google them. Google Diva Cups, and then...
How do you spell that?
Diva
D-I-V-A?
Cups. Yeah, I mean, Diva as in, like, you know...
Like a diva,
like
lady,
Aretha,
singer, yes.
Aretha Franklin, or whatever her name is.
Okay.
And then, like, the cups as in, like, what you drink out of, but you don't want to drink out of these ones.
Okay.
Anyway, okay, so... But it was held at this cool little independent bookstore on the Lower East Side of New York, which I just happened to be visiting New York to visit my boyfriend's family for some, you know, vacation time, whatever. And at the same time, a furry friend I know up there, Jimmy Wolf, invited me out to this book signing for Kyle Gold. He was reading, I think he read about 15 minutes worth out of Position from early on in the novel, I believe. Excuse me. And I drew a pretty impressive crowd, too. If they filled out the bookstore, I think we were like 40, 50 people. It's a pretty impressive crowd.
Nice.
I know. The line for the book signing line stretched out for a long time, and I was really impressed because Kyle Gold stopped and chatted with everybody. He didn't rush anybody along.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
If they had a big bag of books, he signed every book. It was a good time.
Good. Yeah.
And he spent a long time answering questions as well from people. Like, everybody was very curious about what his writing processes was, and I asked a question myself because I always like to take these little public platforms because I'd like to talk, whatever, hear myself speak.
I'd be disappointed if you didn't.
But it was a great time. So, I mean, I hope there are just more events like this. If you hear about an event like this around your town, like, make it a point to go out, you know, support furry literature,
and we're happy,
push your boundaries,
you know, if there's
experience
something,
things you might not have before, you know.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, and if there's something going on, we'd be happy to, I think in most cases, to give you a little bump on the air.
Yeah, sure.
That's fine. Let's see, we've got some good stories coming up in the next few episodes. I think we'll have our first straight story. Maybe not next episode, but the one after that. For our next episode, we got this story by Alflor called Stasis. Kind of another a sci-fi theme. Another otter, by the way. Another otter.
Oh, jeez. I told you, the stocks are rising. We need a raccoon-assance.
Yeah.
I want to be reading stories about raccoons. How many raccoons have been in these stories so far?
I don't think any.
No, I don't know.
Whose fault is that?
I know there was a raccoon in White Yote's story.
Oh, yes.
I believe, wasn't there?
Yes, a doorman.
Yes.
No, elevator operator. That's it. The elevator operator.
We got one paltry. Damn, I can't.
He's
that's not
like
worth
going
anything.
down.
No, but okay. So next week,
boy.
but we'll have this cool sci-fi kind of like thriller, but you know, story. Not quite thriller, but more muted than that. But
yep.
Should be
And
fun.
yeah, I think the one after that we'll have a straight story, which we will I'll get through because you know I'm bi. Toonses will manage. He will.
Well, like I said,
you
gotta push your boundaries sometimes.
But yeah, if you so if you have a story you would like read, even if it's something different from what we've read so far, especially perhaps if it's something different than what we've read so far, please drop us a line, let us know, and submit your story. We'd love to hear from you. Like
I said at the top of the show, we're not really looking for published works. We're not looking for the most well-known authors. If you just have like a first draft out there that you think might be worth something that we might like, I mean, send it to us. Doesn't matter if you change it later. If we like it, we'll read it. Gonna get you some publicity or some
absolutely
something.
And if it has been published before, usually so far we've been able to get the audio permissions for everything too. So, and we know people at Sofa Wolf, we know people at Fur Planet. So if you have something out there that you'd like out in audio, just let us know too. I think that's about it.
The unpublished stuff.
Go
underground.
Oh, yeah, no, I know.
Things that are published on Xeroxes.
All right. Well, that's extremely. That's like from before you were born.
Well, those are the things they were selling at Blue Stockings. You know, like these little just cut up folders of what are they called? Zines. That's what they
back
are.
In the day, before they had the internet.
Goodness. They were terrible too. Cost like $5
so anyway,
each.
yes, visit us at baddogBooks.com/book club. I've been Skip Ruddertail.
This is Toonses, the driving cat.
And the show is produced, as always, by Alex Vance, who is the president and dictator for life of Bad Dog Books. See us next
everybody.
week.
Ciao.
Thank you.